Why does it matter that a tech magnate responsible for weapons-grade military drones and has visibly allied himself with white nationalists wants to make a new type of Game Boy? That's a hell of a starting point, but the longer video games linger in the mainstream, the more I think we should talk about thorny issues, where this line between toys and playfulness and serious business and human cost might bleed together. Hi. I'm Sam Miskovich. I've been doing games and tech and arts journalism for over 25 years, and I'm still kind of fresh on doing a YouTube series of various videos where I talk about news and old stuff and how tech and art come together in our lives. This week I'm trying something called Party Chat. A topic like gaming, drill down to really nerdy bits almost to a fault to get to a bigger picture answer of what's going on with a topic and why it matters, so that you could then take this topic to your own social events or parties and talk about them without sounding nearly as obsessive and hyper-focused and nerdy as me. This week's will possibly hyperfixate on stuff you either don't know about or don't care about, like magnesium aluminum alloys or field programmable gate arrays. But it'll also touch upon things like cult of personality, scantily clad toys, and potential attempts to chill free speech. And Tetris. This week, a new retro-minded video game company emerged with a flashy announcement and a video to match. This company's called Mod Retro, and it's working on an apparently modern Game Boy reproduction. It's designed to play original Game Boy and Game Boy Color cartridges with some modern flourishes. Mod Retro Chromatic. It'll potentially launch by this year's end, both via online pre-orders and in-person purchases at GameStop, a sentence that you may not often say these days, and will start at $199. The promotional video features celebrities like Logan Paul, or is it Jake Paul? It's one of the Pauls, Karen Gillan, Sam Richardson from I Think You Should Leave, and it prominently stars Palmer Luckey, a man best known as the creator of the very first Oculus Rift VR headset. He describes the device as heirloom-grade tribute art. He says it will last for generations, and he frequently calls out doing something that's the best, even if it doesn't make sense. In both this video and an accompanying blog post, Luckey is all about this sales bluster, ultimate, final form technology with a late-night infomercial zeal about how irrational this sales proposition is. It's enough so to make any reasonable person stop and ask, well, why is Palmer Luckey investing so much in this device on both a manufacturing and promotional level? According to these official proclamations, Luckey is just a guy who likes to take old game systems apart and make them better, and that he's been doing it since he was a teenager. His posts include the bold and arguably unprovable claim that Palmer Luckey was the first person to ever put an LED backlight into an original Game Boy. We'll get to that. And that he is starting this company with a larger purpose of generally putting out hardware and software from an older era. Mod Retro Chromatic will have a limited launch as a device. It'll be paired with old school Game Boy cartridges that are priced roughly $45 a pop, with other potential products coming down the line to be announced later. What those will be, we don't know. So, hey, a successful entrepreneur has a past obsession with old technology. He's got name checks of these popular efforts to unlock, jailbreak, and use existing hardware the way he wants. And he's just in a goodness of his heart zone to invest in and release some cool devices. He wants it to be like things used to be in gaming, liberated from predatory mainstream concepts like online all the time and microtransactions. If you've watched my channel over the past few weeks, you've seen me talk about similar principles, so I guess Palmer Luckey and I are totally aligned. In the same promotional bluster, Luckey also bluntly name-checks his current entrepreneurial focus. These are his words: lethal autonomous weapon systems. That company, Anduril, works as a private defense contractor with the US military and its allies, and it manufactures, among other things, a variety of weapons-grade drones. Anduril was founded in the wake of what Luckey has described as his firing from Facebook over his association with a one-time donation of nearly $10,000 during the 2016 presidential campaign season to a politically motivated advertising effort. Some people might call it shitposting, others might describe it as pro-Trump or anti-Clinton. Either way, in the years since, Luckey has participated in multiple fundraisers on Donald Trump's behalf, including a fundraiser he's hosting this coming weekend in Newport Beach, California. Remember, he's doing fundraising for convicted felon former President Donald Trump. Also, in 2017, Palmer Luckey was photographed allying himself with Steve, convicted then pardoned, Bannon, and neo-Nazi sympathizer Chuck C. Johnson. we're getting away from the Game Boy stuff here, but when you start digging, it gets messy. It gets political. Enough so that I, currently a solo journalist without a fact-checking staff or legal team, I should be careful before going too declarative. Does this 2017 photo I reference, complete with the OK hand sign, does that truly suggest Luckey sympathizes with the most heinous corners of the alt-right movement? In some recent Reddit posts from last month, Luckey suggested it does not, but he also says curious things in that defense. He suggests the gesture came to prominence because of Trump using the signal, despite no other resource I've ever dug up coming to that conclusion. If you want to explore the complicated history of this, the alt-right, of Trump, and the OK hand signal, the Southern Poverty Law Center's primer is a great start, linked below. Luckey also suggests in this recent series of posts that he had just met Johnson during the moment of that photo. But there's a Freedom of Information Act release that links that duo to together meeting the head of the U.S. Interior in April 2017, apparently over talking about the border wall, which links quite neatly into the eventual formation of Anduril as an autonomous defense supplier. And just from this recent Reddit series of posts, he attempts to distance himself from alt-right provocateur Milo Yiannopoulos, despite a CNET report from 2016 that drew a clear connection that Yiannopoulos served at least once as Luckey's online handler while he was hiding behind a Reddit moniker, Nimble Rich Man, while advertising his intent to support Trump politically. There's more to that story, but again, messy political commentary, getting a little bit away from a Game Boy, right? But yeah, what is less messy? What's less messy than a company that produces, markets, and sells weapons-grade military drones? Less messy than multiple financial associations with convicted felon Donald Trump? Less messy than the time Luckey announced an art concept that attached explosive devices to a VR headset and was designed to literally kill its wearer if they die inside of a video game? Yeah, that's a thing that he talked about. Maybe a high-end Game Boy is less messy than this stuff, along with future fancy game systems, and a related video that has Luckey sitting in a room with over a dozen scantily clad anime statuettes on the walls, sitting on the floor in a way that suggests harmlessness or perhaps even normalization. Just to be clear, most of these statuettes have clothes. Back to Mod Retro Chromatic as a possible device. Could be vaporware, could be real someday, because we're talking about someone whose relationship with the truth has been muddy at best. CNET dug deeply into the 2016 Nimble America incident that I was talking about, where Luckey offered different stories between what he told journalists in emailed statements and what he told coworkers in a formal apology. The Reddit posts I talked about, I believe, raised more questions than they answered. And in this week's Mod Retro announcement, Luckey suggests being the very first person in the world to perform certain kinds of Game Boy backlighting mods. It's the kind of bluster that's fine for a throwaway post on an anonymous forum. I was the first to do a thing when I was 12. My uncle works at Nintendo. I totally have the highest score in the random game. This kind of statement is less ideal when your word is the selling point for a never-before-seen device. If you don't have the patents or the video proof, maybe back off and just say, I did that stuff when I was really young and did it early and love it. Like, it could have been as simple as that. So we're already not on stable footing when we evaluate a first-time product manufacturer. You can give Luckey credit for hardware like Oculus Rift and, I suppose, combat-ready drones, but that's not the same as a comfortable Game Boy recreation reportedly built by an all-new small team. Mod Retro's promotional materials this week talk a lot about emulating the Game Boy Color screen. But that's a curious focus for a platform whose library and most popular hits revolve much more around the original grayscale Game Boy, whose screen was famously awful. It got the job done for the era, and good games were built around its limitations, like the speed and aesthetic of games like Link's Awakening, Metroid 2, Donkey Kong 94, and Wario Land. If it ever exists, maybe Mod Retro Chromatic will do wonders for these kinds of greenscale games. But already the promotional blitz feels like it's a misread of who collects for the Game Boy and how it's cheaper to get Game Boy games and how they're much more widely traded and trafficked. Go to any retro store that sells old cartridges, you're going to get that feedback from store owners. Speaking of the display, there's a lot of description about what we're going to get inside of Mod Retro Chromatic. Supposedly it's pixel accurate, 160 by 144 pixels with a specific sub-pixel tuning. We're told that this is somehow faithful and superior as a screen compared to the Game Boy Color. This newer one is backlit, the older one was not. So the nerdy dive I would believe in is color reproduction can't be identical when you're adding light to the thing. That's just how our eyes take in the wavelengths, which is fine. But Luckey is really insistent on somehow having all of this perfect pixel cake. I don't quite trust it yet. Chromatic also went for an identical screen size to the original Game Boy, about 2.5 inches, which is weird in 2024 when massive screen bordering bezels no longer make sense. So maybe that was part of how he got the special custom screen to make it super tiny. Maybe these are the kind of screens that are already going into other products he's making for Anduril or any other company that he's associated with. It's unclear. We're also told that Chromatic's shell is molded out of magnesium aluminum alloy, and that its hardware will rely on a field programmable gate array, or FPGA, to perform something called hardware emulation. There's plenty to say about the advantages of each of these, but the biggest disadvantage is weight, and that's much more of an issue with the alloy. The most popular magnesium aluminum consumer products out there are mice, computer mice, and they often have giant webs and openings in their shells as a way to counter the material's general weight and work better with the alloy's natural properties. Mod Retro Chromatic will likely need a relatively thick layer of the alloy based on its shape and construction. You can't have that kind of alloy be super thin and have it bend in the specific spots, generally, unless they've come up with some sort of innovation there, which they haven't really talked about. So the thing they definitely haven't talked about is weight. That's not a good sign when you list off all these very specific specs, the specific number of inches, the type of material, but you can't say grams or ounces for something you would expect to hold for hours, perhaps even while lying in bed with the weight unevenly in your palms. There's also the fact that for $20 more, you can line up and purchase a similar device that actually exists called the Analog Pocket. I've written about and talked about Analog Pocket at length. It also supports Game Boy and Game Boy Color cartridges by default. It also relies on FPGA for really accurate Game Boy recreation. It's got a gorgeous screen that's tuned for the original Game Boy resolution. It's actually 10 times the pixels to sort of do a different kind of technique to making it look pixel perfect. And it does a lot more. You get filters and tweaks to make the colors look as much or as little like the old Game Boy as you want. It plays Game Boy Advance cartridges by default. It has physical adapters that supports other retro systems like Sega Game Gear or Atari Lynx if you want to go that far. It can be jailbroken to support even more gaming possibilities. Analog has its own issues, namely some pretty spotty customer support, but I'll take that over some of Luckey's worst associations and questions any day. There's also the fact that Luckey's relationship with criticism and pushback is not always healthy. In the past, I've seen Palmer Luckey direct his ire at journalists who reach out in any capacity other than ones that he prefers. The last time I directly contacted Palmer Luckey seeking a comment on a story I was working on, he replied by criticizing my employer over a story that he didn't like, a story I neither wrote nor edited, and otherwise declined to answer my question. I recall at the time wondering why Luckey didn't take that opportunity to contact the site's management and editor-in-chief, someone who was responsible for a story that I had never written. I don't know if he ever eventually did. I don't have that information, but I do recall at the time thinking this was more about using a public platform to inflame than about to take real steps towards resolving something that bordered on making a professional accusation. And it reminded me of a certain politician that Palmer Luckey has donated quite a bit of money to. There's also the time he chose to reply to a journalist during the 2016 discourse by inviting that journalist on the record to go fuck yourself. And this week, he responded to one Twitter comment about Chromatic's apparent manufacturing costs by replying simply and bluntly, "I am a billionaire." That adds up to a different kind of bluster that once again resembles the Trump MO of dodging accountability, not engaging in good faith, and seeking a reaction from followers. The last interaction I had with Palmer Luckey, I believe, came before Anduril had reached its current standing and relationship with the U.S. Department of Defense. As in, I didn't know the guy on the other end of the line might just be operating drones that, can kill. So it leads me to wonder, what happens if a journalist picks around too deeply at Mod Retro? At what point does Palmer Luckey replace an errant Twitter reply with something more insidious and, God help me, autonomous and deadly? Much in the same way, you look at Elon Musk's relationship with critics and the truth. He burns bridges, dodges accountability, and even indirectly suggests that followers know his critics' names and maybe do something about that. All the while, Musk combines his grappling for greater geopolitical power in the form of SpaceX contracts and Starlink satellite communications in far-off corners of the world, including war zones, with cute culture claiming efforts like releasing a so-called flamethrower or having a person dance around in a robot suit and say that it was a robot when he knew it wasn't, or buying and operating Twitter as he sees fit. So if Palmer Luckey aspires to expand Mod Retro with more products, more promotions, I agree with some of his initial suggestions that it'd be irrational to do so, at least irrational on an isolated money-making basis. But Luckey's Anduril suggests that his company looks deeply into all forms of combat on a research and development basis, and information control is certainly one avenue to control the business warfield. Which all leads me to think about the new system's alignment with, of all things, Tetris. A new version of Tetris, designed for the Game Boy Color specs with modern retouches, will come as a cartridge with every Mod Retro Chromatic console. This deal in effect resembles the original Game Boy's Western launch, and apparently it has the Tetris company's official blessing. Tetris's development, you may recall, was fraught by the clamped down and arguably fascist control of Pajitnov's singular creative vision inside the Soviet Union. There's a pretty solid movie on Apple TV+. It bends some of the truth, but it really does tell the story about the great efforts and legal savvy that was required to get the game released to the rest of the world. And it hints about how later Alexei Pajitnov, the creator, also had to be extricated with similar legal duress from a country that he has made clear he was happy to leave. Weird then that Tetris is now connected to a shiny, hyper-colored product line whose shadow hides a billions of dollars business effort to support autonomous machines of death, along with a company founder who supports a presidential candidate who, among many other issues, loudly aligns with Russian leadership that wants to drag that nation back to brutal fascist autonomy. This, by the way, is my way of saying that I don't plan on reviewing or supporting Mod Retro Chromatic, but also that I see why other journalistic outlets are likely to either skip talking about the system or pick a path of least resistance, a simple review, a simple no politics, just buttons kind of take. Journalism in 2024 is already a pain in the butt for writers and editors who see layoffs and shrinking budgets around every corner. Nobody in the tech sector is trying to invite this kind of mess, this topic, to their editorial calendars and comment sections, which is why I'm choosing to talk about it, to signal that there's a chilling thread when fun gadgets, global ramifications, and unresponsive business leaders swirl together. Speech can be chilled when this stuff all combines, and the narrative that comes out that's fun and easy to share is a way to manipulate the media to get them talking about what you want them to talk about. Reminder then that there's something calculated here. There's a system. There is a game being played. And picking up the Mod Retro Chromatic would be you, in my opinion, losing that game. There's a much longer and more fraught video that could tap into these very issues by only scratching a millimeter into the surface. Off the top of my head, Microsoft and Unity are two major players in the modern gaming world who have significant and arguably troubling contracts with the US military, among other organizations. Or we can just go into the human rights issues that swirl around whatever device you're likely watching this video on and how it was made and how it was sent to you at what price you're paying for it. Oh, but shoot, I'm out of time. Maybe next millennium we can get to that topic. I am interested in digging further into topics like this. If you are, always as ever, sam@samred.com is an email address that's open for responses. Visit samred.com to see any future plans for subscription, Patreon, or other types of content, or comments below to let me know whether I need to put up any sort of surveillance outside my house for little buzzing things with tiny turrets attached. I do appreciate you listening and happy to talk soon. Take care.